let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes
It's actually
in
a big piece of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say a
As the
developer
Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed,
Hi, and welcome to another episode of In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman. Thank you for joining us. Can't believe it is already February 2025. First episode of the year. Apologies for not getting one out in January. Am trying to do at least one of these a month. Sure, as many of you are doing, kind of kickoff of the year, getting ready for our sales kickoff, our user conference, a lot of planning and activity going on. Speaking of which, we actually will be doing a preview for KubeCon Cloud Native Con London in a month. If you want to mark your calendars, it's going to be, right now it's planned for March 13th. And I've got a couple of Europeans on, so we will be doing it at a slightly earlier time zone, 8 o'clock Eastern, which will be good for most of Europe. The other big thing, if you are going to KubeCon in London, please come check out the Day Zero event of OpenShift Commons. We're going to put a link in the chat here. Commons is free to attend. You do not even need a KubeCon badge to be able to come to it. It is a very short walk from the Excel Center. It's going to be a phenomenal event where we always have the community sharing, customers sharing with their peers, a lot of interesting topic, AI, virtualization, platform engineering, you name it in this cloud native ecosystem. There will be a lot of that going on. And the call for papers will actually be closing in a couple of days. So if you have a interesting topic and want to share it with your peers, please do hop in there, register for the event, and come to it. But that is, we still have almost 2 months until KubeCon. So today, I am super happy to have Chuck Dubuque with us. Chuck is a senior director for product marketing at Red Hat in the hybrid platforms business unit, he's a peer of mine. Chuck, we're going to talk about virtualization. We're going to talk about OpenShift 4.18. Thank you so much. Great to see you. You and I both in a little bit of winter weather here in the Northeast.
Yes, I think the first snowflakes are starting to fall in what is a mid-sized storm. So we'll have our shovels out pretty soon after those.
All right. So Chuck, it's great to have you on the program. We've had some of your people on the program before. You and I have known each other for a long time. I knew you your first stint at Red Hat, and then, you came back before I joined Red Hat. But if you could just give our audience a little bit, your background and what your role is here at Red Hat.
Yeah. And like you said, I have had 2 stints at Red Hat. I'm what we call a boomerang. So I joined Red Hat in 2009, just as we were getting ready to enter the virtualization space the first time. And that space is very different than it is today, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I did the launch and messaging for our OpenShift virtualization offering. And then a couple of years later, we started getting involved with something called OpenStack. And so I was a big part of getting Red Hat ready for launching a product offering in that space. After my stint at Red Hat, I spent some time at a storage startup called Tintri, spent some time advising other startup companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then about 6 years ago now, came back to Red Hat to join the OpenShift marketing team. And lo and behold, a couple of years after I joined, some things happened in the virtualization space, and now I'm talking about virtualization again. So containers, storage, virtualization, lots of different waves, and shows you can catch those waves multiple times sometimes.
Yeah, Chuck, I've had to make the disclaimer. The name of the show is In the Clouds. And for the last kind of 18 months, we've talked a lot about AI. We've talked a lot about Vert. We touch on cloud, but it has not been the focus. But as we always used to say years ago, cloud isn't so much a destination as an operating model. And virtualization had just a massive impact on IT. It's one of the defining technologies I know in my career, and many of us that have been part of it. We're going to talk a bunch about OpenShift 4.18, but along with it, there is a new flavor, if you will, of OpenShift called OpenShift Virtualization Engine. If you could give us just the quick, what is it? Why is Red Hat launching?
Yeah, and I think if you look at the OpenShift offering, and as a marketing guy, how we've been marketing it to the market is as an application platform. So there's a lot of infrastructure pieces to OpenShift, but a lot of the original focus was on containerized cloud native applications, and technology that was something that Red Hat worked on in the upstream along with Google and some other folks. Something called KubeVirt was the sort of first pass at, could we make virtual machines so that they could be first-class citizens in a Kubernetes environment. So Kubernetes, for those of you who don't know, or the K word, is the orchestration technology that sort of won those original orchestration container battles back in 2015. So we talk a lot about waves. So containers were a technology that came from Unix and Linux that eventually got codified. There were lots of different options on how to orchestrate those beyond one or two containers on a system. Kubernetes was based on a lot of the work that Google did. We saw that as where we wanted to move OpenShift to, which at the time uses its own orchestration engine. There were things like Mesos and others, but Kubernetes became ultimately the winner in that space. And I think one of the reasons it won is that while it is a container orchestration system, it was designed so that that container orchestration was just one option. So Kubernetes is able to manage lots of other things much more easily than some of its competitors were. So while it sounds strange to have a container orchestration system managing virtual machines, Kubernetes was robust enough to allow it to happen, and KubeVirt was where the Red Hat and the rest of the community came together to make it happen. So that technology has been incubating within OpenShift for a number of years. We saw a lot of customers who wanted to modernize an application, and maybe the first part of that, there's a model of like peeling the onion. So taking a monolithic application inside a virtual machine, taking certain services, making them into containers, and that's sort of the development model. But the whole time that you're doing that, you have to have your what's left of your virtual machine as you're hollowing out in a virtualization system, and your new containers in a very separate container environment. And so, having the ability to take that virtual machine without making any changes to it, bring it right into OpenShift, same namespaces, same SSO, same user interface, same tooling, and then start that modernization process was really appealing to customers.
Yeah.
And of course, things happen in the market.
Yeah, Chuck, it's 10 years into this journey now. It's interesting because so many people think it's like, oh, I think of Kubernetes, and it was like, oh, it is containers. But if you look at a lot of the projects in the ecosystem, they do go beyond that boundary. So service mesh isn't just about containers. It can manage certain other environments. If you look at how things like Knative have extended what we've done into serverless containers. And start working with functions and eventing and the like. When we talk about virtualization, though, Chuck, we said this is decades old technology. VMware has been the market leader, dominant in their space, especially in the data center. The reason I brought you on for this session is I want to talk a little bit about KVM. This is not a new hypervisor. If you could, for audience, just what did KVM do well? What has changed between like the KVM that I would have thought of, a decade ago? And where's it used in the world?
Yeah, and again, in my Wayback Machine that I keep in the closet back there, we can go back to 2008 and 2007, even before I joined Red Hat the first time. There was a hypervisor war. So early lead and early wins for VMware and their ESX hypervisor. Some of you may also know Microsoft had a horse in that race, Hyper-V, based on their acquisition of Connectix. And then there was also a open source hypervisor called Zen. And that was something that Red Hat shipped with our Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And it was one of the early successes. It had some problems though. It was hard to maintain. I think my friends on the Red Hat Enterprise Linux side said it was almost like maintaining two separate operating systems because Zen was so picky about the things it changed in Linux to make virtual machines work. And a small company in Israel called Kubernetes came up with a really cool technology that essentially turned the Linux kernel itself into a virtual machine engine to do hypervisor work. So KVM, if you expand out the acronym, is kernel-based virtual machine, and that's what it is. And so it had a lot of advantages in terms of speed and tying more flexibility in terms of the kinds of operating systems that it could run, performance, security, which was a big deal. And so Red Hat early on started moving towards KVM, and then we acquired Kubernetes and their product, which we commercialized as Red Hat Virtualization, which was designed to be, very much like VMware. And so KVM, rolling forward, has pretty much, except for some few areas, replaced Zen as the open source option for virtualization. You will see it in most cloud vendors today. A lot of the bigger hyperscalers use KVM under the covers. Certainly a lot of regional and smaller ISPs use KVM as an open source option. And it's continued to evolve with all of the goodness that comes into the Linux kernel is immediately available to this hypervisor. So, it became very clear very early on that this was the approach to take.
Yeah, Chuck, it's one of those things underneath the covers, is where people don't think about it. So,
right.
It's like, well, KVM, didn't beat Hyper-V and VMware in the hypervisor battle in the minds of the enterprise for what they were doing in their data center. Yet, it's baked into Linux, and as you said, like if I'm using compute in the cloud for the most part, it's got KVM underneath that. So
yeah,
it's
a lot of the
broad adoption in every geography and every industry out there. And even from a Red Hat standpoint, Chuck, we talked about we had a product, Red Hat Virtualization, but it was maybe talk about that journey of the technology, because there was the thing called OpenStack that used the same stack, and now OpenShift Virtualization. It's same engineers, same technology, all building on enhancing the features along the way.
Yeah, and so Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, or Red Hat Virtualization it became later, was very much on that VMware model. So it was I, as an IT operator, tell the system what I want to have happen, and it does it for me. Had small clusters of very like machines, and in that awful cattles and pets model of types of virtual machines, it assumed that the application itself was tied to the availability, the uptime of the VM. So it was designed to go out of its way to make sure that no one VM died or was starving for resources or things like that. So it was very, very much virtual machine centric, which meant that it was very compatible with older software. But as software started to evolve to become, a cloud, where we get the term, of smaller instances that keep the state of the application holistically among them. Then VMs started to look more like the cloud models we're used to today, where if a one instance of your load balancer dies or loses connectivity, that's okay. I can fire up a new one somewhere else, kill that one, and remove, move from there. So the model of the cloud, which is more of, don't depend on the infrastructure for availability, but we're going to make it so easy that if you make your apps cloud native, you can keep availability holistically, even when the northeast zone is out. And that was the Amazon model. And Amazon was making great strides, but people, especially on the enterprise side, were like, well, we kind of want to do that inside our four walls. And so how can we get Amazon on premises in my data center? And OpenStack was one of the big answers to that question. It was started by a group of folks at NASA, and they were building their own. And originally, the design was meant to be very compatible with AWS and all of its services and all of its APIs and things like that. And so OpenStack started becoming, here's this thing that can run very large data centers internally. It's not tied to this, VMware was all about very small clusters of like things and an infrastructure that goes out of its way to keep every VM up and running all the time. This was more, could handle much larger clusters, much larger availability zones. But it did have that sort of thing that was a nuance, but was very important, which was that it didn't go out of its way to make sure that any one virtual machine stayed up and running. So by the time Red Hat got involved with OpenShift in 2012, it was starting to become very interesting to folks who were looking for alternatives to VMware. And I think some of the initial, I wouldn't say failures, but missed expectations were around that model of what type of VM works well on it. And I remember getting questions about where's the feature X from VMware in OpenStack, and the OpenStack mindset was we don't need that feature because you're going to design your application so that less of that state lives in the VM, and that wasn't always the case.
All right, so Chuck, we already have a comment about this, but let's talk about the $61 billion elephant in the room. So
yes,
KVM, when it first launched, open source or alternative to something like VMware. OpenStack, as you mentioned, the initial thing was like beat Amazon, beat VMware, save licenses, everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Today, OpenShift virtualization engine, absolutely, this is, an alternative for the customers that have said, hey,
right.
Broadcom might have changed the equation. So what's different now? Like, how's the technology matured? In many ways, look, we work for Red Hat, Chuck, and from a marketing standpoint, look, the technology, the finances, like all these things have come together to this perfect opportunity. But, why is this not like, oh, we've seen this movie before, you've lived it a couple of times, Chuck.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think we'll go back to the last that I talked about OpenShift itself. OpenShift virtualization is a feature across all of the OpenShift editions. And, we were seeing mostly, folks who were building cloud native containerized applications, and occasionally they wanted a virtual machine, maybe as a database or something like that. Or they were doing app modernization, and they really liked that idea of taking a VM and bringing it over to our system and converting it over time. When the Broadcom acquisition, occurred, and pricing changes and packaging changes started percolating around, folks started looking for an alternative, and they really wanted a place to move those VMs first, and maybe later think about the modernization. So, OpenShift Virtualization Engine is a way to get that virtualization capability that we've that we've built into OpenShift, but without paying for all of the other pieces you're not going to use right away. And we found that again, those folks who started looking to us for migrating a large number of VMs off of their existing platform onto something else, really wanted, to do that first. I think one of the salespeople was like, when the fire's burning, you're not thinking about your 401k. You're thinking about getting out of the house first. So that was the appeal for OpenShift virtualization and why we created it. It was a way for us to offer first that landing spot for just running virtual machines and just keeping those virtual machines running and productive. And then, you would over time look at OpenShift for modernizing those applications and maybe for getting to this new thing that we talk about a lot called AI, as opposed to just keeping those virtual machines in place for the next 20 years.
Yeah. It's an interesting balance for most customers is like, okay, when am I ready to modernize or learn a lot of these technologies? I'm relatively happy with my stack, even though we sometimes have challenges managing it. One of the interesting ones that's come up in my conversation with customers is something we've had challenges in IT as long as I've been in the industry is my environment and do I have drift? So,
Right.
I think back in the day, banks used to have their golden CD or their golden server. So one of the things, even just this virtualization offering we have that people have been excited about is the GitOps capability. So something that I can actually, have my configurations. It's in GitHub. I'm going to always make sure it's on top of that, and I don't need to learn lots of new ways of doing things, but I can actually bring my virtual machines into from this standpoint, a more modern way to manage and, view my different activities. So it's one of those things they get to dip their toe into something that everybody else has been using that hasn't necessarily been a standard in the virtualization world.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the unintended or unexpected benefits that folks have when they start adopting OpenShift virtualization is that all these other cloud native tools that they may have been using at an application basis now become available for their virtual machine life cycles as well. And you talked about the drift that happens over time, and one of the mindset changes that folks need to make when they're moving from like a traditional virtualization to a Kubernetes environment is that high level concept of imperative versus declarative. So in VMware, you have to have a whole bunch of systems that detect if something's going wrong, and then somebody on the IT staff has to imperatively tell the system to go fix that one thing. And that's kind of a harder puzzle to scale beyond those small clusters and that environment, but it's very IT centric and folks know how to run it. Kubernetes is a declarative model, which is like, I'm going to tell Kubernetes, this is my ideal state, and do everything you can to make that ideal state what is in reality. And if you can't get there, let me know. And so it's a different mindset. And we found that, one of the things that we've been doing over the last year and a half to 2 years is, making for virtualization, bridging that gap and making the user experience much more like what they're used to, in terms of, I have to tell the system to do these things in order to keep uptime and availability, while introducing them to the fact that, we have policy management through technologies like advanced Kubernetes management advanced cluster manager for Kubernetes that will do that for you and do that in a much more scalable way. I think the initial culture shock at the beginning for a lot of the admins is that, it does work slightly differently in terms of that mindset. And that's a thing that we've been actually investing a lot of time and resources in making that easier, and also making it easier to go to the maybe more Kubernetes native way of managing these objects as VMs, and as you make them modernized into containers, and then moving into AI and other workflows.
Yeah. So Chuck, that's such a really good point. One of the things, if I'm in the the VMware ecosystem, there was a cadence that I was used to as to when releases would happen. And in the cloud native world, it's a little bit faster. It's not the 18-month cycle. We're more on the 4-month cycle. So two quick things on that. Number one is we will support things for a pretty long time. These are not just ephemeral VMs that I'm going to run for minutes. I'm going to be able to treat it like a VM, act like a VM, looks and acts and walks like a duck, that kind of standpoint. From a feature set, though, some people that might have looked at our offering 2 years ago, so many things have been updated. So that list of, hey, what do I need to do differently versus have we made things look, act, and feel more like what I was used to? Those gaps have been closing. Because it's funny. I remember, 2 years ago, people would be like, oh, well, geez, do you have a vMotion equivalent? It's like, yeah, we've had live migration for like 5 years. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That was like, checkbox. Yes, we absolutely have that. I want to bring us up to talk a little bit about 4.18, because there's things like, oh, well, live migration I had. Well, what about like storage vMotion? Well, in the Kubernetes world, I had a different way to do things, but yes, we now have, full, VM storage migration is generally available. And we talk a lot about the data center, but our partnership and offerings of what we do in the cloud have also been accelerating over the last year. So maybe talk a little bit about what's changed recently from a virtualization offering.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, live migration or vMotion we've had for a very long time. The storage vMotion, I think 2 or 3 years ago, our engineers might have said, well, you don't need storage vMotion if you are doing cloud native storage. And from the Kubernetes point of view, that's sort of redundant. But we've come around. we realized that this is a key part of validated workflows, audited processes at our customers, and we've invested a lot of time both in KubeVirt and Kubernetes, the engineering work that we do directly, but also with our partners in the storage ecosystem to make sure that we have answers for those questions. So yes, the storage live migration is one of the things I think we're most excited about from a 4.18 standpoint. And it's an example of what Red Hat does on a daily basis, which is yes, we do take the innovation that comes in naturally from open source communities, but we also participate, and we're the advocates for our customers. And so as customers have come to us asking for more of these features that perhaps were not part of the original vision for Kubernetes or for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, we find that we bring a lot of customer use cases, a lot of common needs back to those communities, and get the innovation into the upstream so that everybody can benefit from it, but also so that our customers are able to take advantage of that and go forward. And then we, of course, add in the work that we do with validated and certified partners to make sure that the storage is guaranteed to work with the storage migration and things like that. So that's just one of many innovations, and even subtle things like Kubernetes natively, and at least in all of the OpenShift UI views, didn't have a hierarchical tree view. Because again, the cloud native model is like, you don't need a hierarchical tree view. It's just a cloud of interdependencies. Look at this cool chart in 3 dimensions. But a lot of our users were just expecting that, and that was an easy fix for us to do in terms of the user experience. The second part of your comment really about virtualization in the cloud, which again, sounds like a misnomer. I think we all suffered through the first definition of hybrid cloud, which was all about, the science fiction of bursting live running virtual machines from your data center into the cloud and having it 100% available that whole time. It's not really what we're talking about anymore. It is, virtual machines running in the cloud. So like we have customers who might have a corporate database that was only available as a virtual machine, but they want it to be accessible to their app instances that are in AWS or GCP or in Azure. We have a lot of customers that either want that capability, or we're using some of the solutions that VMware has sunsetted in terms of their offerings of vSphere in the cloud. And so we're working with our hypervisor, with our hyperscaler partners, to offer OpenShift virtualization in the cloud on specific cloud offerings. So today you can run it in AWS either as a self-managed offering or as a service. We are announcing as part of 4.18 that we'll support OpenShift on bare metal and OCI, the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. And that allows us to start testing as a tech preview Oracle Cloud infrastructure for those virtualization use cases. Similar on Google Cloud Platform, we'll have a technology preview again to be running on Google Cloud for OpenShift virtualization. And we continue to get more and more interest from other customers for other cloud offerings. And again, from a usability and user experience standpoint, these are just objects that you can manage from OpenShift, from advanced cluster management, no matter where they are. And treat them holistically with the same team and the same user interface and the same processes and policies, and be able to apply those to virtual machines as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Just a quick note, because we talked a little bit about KVM, and some might ask, it's like, well, hey, if the underlying compute from the storage suppliers leverage this, why wouldn't I just, if I wanted to go to the cloud from VMware, why wouldn't I do that? And a lot of it is, if I look at the feature stack that I get with just using a virtual machine in the cloud, it doesn't have all of the bells and whistles that we were just talking about in our offering. So that's why, like Amazon, for example, we're one of their migration assistant partners. And they're like, yes, you can go to EC2, but we have a couple of partners, and one of them's Red Hat, that will make it an easier transition to go from the old world, whether that be in the data center and go into the cloud, or if we're using some of those, bare metal managed VMware offerings in the cloud before.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to remember that KVM is just the hypervisor piece of it, and that allows you to run a virtual machine. And it's a very powerful technology, very performant. It's at the base of still our OpenStack offering, uses KVM as the hypervisor. And you can run KVM virtual machines on our Red Hat Enterprise Linux or any Linux now. But that is, that's just the hypervisor. What people pay VMware for is not ESXi. They don't even offer that as an offering anymore. What they do charge for, and the value, is in vSphere, and that's the collection of tools and an orchestrator that manages the life cycle of those virtual machines, and that's where the real value is. So yes, KVM is under the covers in RHEL, it's under the covers in our OpenStack offering, and it's under the covers in OpenShift virtualization. It's KVM that is providing that hypervisor capability, and what you're selecting really is what do you want to manage on top of it, and how much do you need in terms of scale and security and manageability. You could do all of that technically on RHEL with command line. Wouldn't recommend it beyond a few virtual machines on your local server. OpenStack has its use cases, but again, I think from where the market is going, OpenStack has a great existing customer base, but probably about half of it is telco and half of it is ISPs offering private cloud. There's some large organizations that have OpenStack as their private cloud internally. And those are great customers and great use cases, but OpenShift based on Kubernetes is, not just a, in my opinion, a better technology for going forward, but it's also where you're likely to find trained resources or people who are willing to get trained and certified for something new. It has that future-proof element to it right now in terms of, I'm going to invest in something, this is the way to go. And the benefit for folks who are looking for alternatives to VMware or their existing virtualization is it not only gets you a place to run your VMs, but a place to modernize those applications, a place to spin up new applications, and a place that will eventually get you to embedding AI into your applications. And that's a pretty powerful message for our customers.
Yeah, Chuck, I think you made a really important point there is, we had a number of years that we had to educate the market. And I think our customer adoption has proved that, look, Kubernetes is wonderful, but it was a very thin layer, and OpenShift gives you much more than that. Just like not only, KVM, but KubeVirt itself is just a very, all KubeVirt does is allow me to take KVM and put it into a pod. It's the full offering of OpenShift around that creates an environment. So sometimes there is FUD or commentary in the market as to, the maturity and, what KubeVirt can or can't do. And the offering that we have, OpenShift Virtualization, including OpenShift Virtualization Engine, there's much more around that to be able to give you that full solution that you're looking for. So Chuck, OpenShift 4.18.
Yes.
We put up in the chat the full what's new. There's a 90-minute with all the product managers going through it. Virtualization is probably 5 minutes out of that 90 minutes that we've got. So we're not going to spend another hour on this, but I'm wondering, is there anything else in 4.18 outside of the virtualization activity that we talked about that you would want to highlight?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm most excited about right now is a lot of the work that we're doing in OpenShift Lightspeed, and that's, while it's not a GA yet, it's still an evolving tech preview. We've been getting a lot of great customer feedback, and for those of you who don't know what OpenShift and OpenShift Lightspeed is are taking generative AI models and training them on OpenShift operations and policies and management, feeding in the documentation, product knowledge, and using that to assist in the process of day-to-day operations in OpenShift. So, again, OpenShift is very powerful. It's very expansive in terms of a product offering. And so we want to give our users more in-context information about, things that might need our attention, or how to do something that we've, haven't done lately or before. And there's always guidance about what the best ways are to do that, or how to write your YAML code in order to fix that. And you could spend time on our very robust customer support portal looking for all that information, or you could hit Stack Overflow. But just as more, former Stack Overflow devotees are now going to ChatGPT to ask their questions, we want you to have the ability to do that in OpenShift in context, but also know that we've taken a look at the training. We know that we're ingesting and training it on the right material, and try not to lead you astray. Asterisk, hey, this answer was AI generated. So it's really, really exciting just to see in the few months that we've been working on the technology, how useful it can be in the day-to-day operations. And also, it falls into our virtualization story too, because we've been trying to make it more aware of, again, not just how to do things, but with some knowledge of how you might have done things in vSphere and how to translate those without having to look it up in the manual.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely would prefer to be able to, ask a query in natural language rather than sorting through all the documents. And, yeah, the capability also to help with like, oh, I have a log or an error code that I would like a little bit of help with. It would be nice that I have something that is specific to the product. And even over time, I can train it more for my environment. So super exciting. I know last year at Red Hat Summit, we showed off a little bit of it, and it is now, as you said, it's in preview for customers to be able to get their hands on, and love more feedback on it, and definitely look for more updates on that in the near future. All right, Chuck, we've covered a lot of ground. There's a lot more we could on OpenShift,
Yes.
but I think, are you ready for some questions from a Red Hat? All right, Chuck. So everybody that watches the show knows, and just looking at me, that I am a large Star Wars devotee. You, sir, are well known to be an avid Trekkie. For those that can't see, right next to Chuck's head is a small model of the USS Enterprise. I can't tell from this angle which model number specifically it is, and I'm not that much of a Trekkie that I would know all the differences. But Chuck, we just talked about the world
Yes.
of virtual machines and containers. If you were to assign a Star Trek captain to each of those worlds, which one would it be?
That's interesting. So I think for the world of containers, I would assign Captain 7 of 9 from the recent Star Trek Picard season 3, because everything is everything in Borg world is cubes that are interchangeable and replaceable and highly redundant, and you could destroy 70% of the Borg cube and it's still functional. So, and that's what the container model is. It's that it's the cattle, not the pets, and it's the redundancy to take it, to survive an onslaught of Black Friday retail or a run on the bank and still keep everything up and running. For the virtual machines, I'd have to go with Captain Picard, because he spent a lot of time in the holodeck, having bespoke adventures, and again, probably had his library of favorite Dixon Hill novels for mysteries that he would keep revisiting over time. And it was very important for those worlds to have all of that detail. They were very stateful in their nature, and they were single purpose for the captain's amusement on his off hours.
All right. Kudos to you. I knew you would have fun with that one, Chuck, with no advance warning. So, yes, hope you enjoy a nice either a cup of Earl Grey tea or, a bottle from the Picard Vineyards when you have a chance. All right. Next.
Yeah, I'll probably have a mug of Racconcino.
So, Chuck, we mentioned at the front that you are a boomerang to Red Hat. Why do you think there are so many boomerangs at Red Hat?
I hadn't really thought of it. I think one is we have a very strong and unique culture in the company that brings people back. When they do cross the fence to see how the grass is on the other side, we tend to have still very fond memories of the time that we were at Red Hat. I think also just that, while a lot of folks leave a company because they feel like they've outgrown it, learned everything they can from it, that was probably where I was feeling in 2014. By the time I came back in 2018, Red Hat had rapidly evolved, not just the number of employees, but just the technologies that had just taken off. OpenShift being the primary one that was attractive to me. So, being able to step out for a few years and learn some new skills in other contexts, and then feel like you're taking on new challenges when you come back, even though 10 years later I'm here talking to you about virtualization again, but it's a very different type of virtualization than it was in 2009.
All right, so Chuck, you've got the marketing hat. We know that one of the most important things in marketing is to try to be consistent with your messaging, but we know that the tech world that we live in is ever changing. So I'm wondering, how does marketing adapt to be able to, live in this ever-changing world that we are in the tech landscape?
Yeah, it is always a challenge. It's usually a good challenge, and I think that uh, you know the way that we operate today is very different. I know we're all still trying to figure out the rules and wherefores with AI tooling, for example, but the ability to uh, to take uh, a competitor's web page and summarize it in a way that really highlights the points that you're looking for, and have it 90% be real is certainly something new that we're taking advantage of. A lot of the signals that we get now, in terms of what's happening in the tech world. We listen more to customer forums and unofficial sources of information, and what our various uh, you know folks are blogging about and things like that, and try to take that into account. And every once in a while, we'll get a big wave. The I think the Broadcom announcement and subsequent actions were very disruptive in a good way. I think there were a lot of that was a fairly settled market in terms of 90%. Uh, uh, 90% of the paid virtualization market was owned by VMware. People were very happy with that decision. Certainly a great technology, but the business context change, and now there's a huge open opportunity that you weren't expecting, and being able to, having participated in those early virtualization days, being able to have enough context to get running and get going quickly, but just being able to move very quickly with that with a new opportunity or a new challenge, I think is one of the ways that we continue to adapt to this market.
Yeah. All right. Well, Chuck, those are the questions from the Red Hat. For those people that are watching from the Red Hat side, Chuck and I will both be at the sales kickoff that is happening next week. Chuck, I want to give you last word. Your team and yourself as you look out through 2025. What are you excited for? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, and we and I have talked a lot about the technology today, but I think a lot of what I'm most excited about is the business value and the impact that the technology has made in the hands of our customers. And one of the big ways that we show that every year is with Red Hat Summit, which for us is coming up very shortly in May in Boston. I'm on the team right now that is looking at the agenda, and I can tell you that we have some incredible customer stories of meeting challenges dead on, and being able to react quickly on the virtualization opportunity, but also folks who are quickly being able to take AI experiments from their data science team and get them into production very quickly with OpenShift. I'm really looking forward to some of those main stage discussions as well, where we bring customers up to talk about some of the higher impacts, or the things that you don't normally think of. And in the past, we've had great stories of hospitals saving lives using predictive AI to get a step ahead of killers like sepsis that hours count, and these changes mean a lot to families and to people. So those are the things that I think are the most exciting. And the alliances that we continue to make with partners like Oracle, like VMware, which is still a huge partner for us in terms of folks run OpenShift on top of VMware. But hyperscaler partners, storage partners, a lot of the ecosystem partners that we're working with in virtualization for things like backup, DR, storage, and others. Those alliances are an incredible journey for us and our customers, and look forward to celebrating those over the course of the rest of the year.
Awesome. Well, hey, Chuck, thank you so much for joining. I'm looking forward to seeing you and the team, next week. And for everybody watching, lots of excitement going on. So as I mentioned, I and a good Red Hat contingency will be at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con in London that first week of April. As Chuck mentioned, Red Hat Summit is in May in Boston. It's not too soon to sign up and register for that. Please do check it out. Reach out as always if you have topics or guests that you'd like us to cover here on the program. With that, I would like to thank everybody for joining us on your journey in the clouds and beyond.